أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Finding Me on ITV Networks. I would like to begin this program by mentioning a beautiful introduction written by Sheikh Siraj Hendricks, who is a teacher of my very special guest who is in the studio with me today. But before I introduce my special guest, I would like to quote to you this beautiful introduction, which was written on the blog In the Shadow of Pure Light, which reflects the position of a human being as being perpetually in the shade of God, a shade that can be both cool and protecting, or dark and isolating, depending on the state of one's soul. Pure light is a reference to God, whom the believer is constantly in search of, and who can only be perceived by the realization that being in God's shade also means becoming the divine shadow, and that the human is intrinsically linked to Allah. His or her entire being is dependent on As-Samad, the Independent One. Just as a shadow can never be severed from the object of its projection and has no will of its own, but to follow its reality. And I think from this deep understanding, you can then appreciate the value of my guest and the value of her teachers. Today I have with me Safiyya Surtee. Safiyya is a graduate of Arabic and Islamic Studies from the University of Johannesburg and the University of South Africa. And she's currently completing her MA in Islamic Studies at UJ, with a focus on women's ritual participation in the Hanafi madhab. She studied Arabic in the UAE and in Lebanon. She dabbled in freelance journalism and is also a community activist. But she is mostly concerned with Muslim women's issues, and that's why I find her work and her responses absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure you will enjoy the discussion with her too. She's a contributor to the Muslimah Media Watch, where she critiques representations of Muslim women in the media. She currently lectures in the study of Islam and gender justice at the University of Johannesburg and has worked at the Afro-Middle East Center. Safiyya publishes her articles at safiyyasurtee.wordpress.com, which we will put up for you later so that you can access and read her beautiful work, and often blogs her reflections at South African Muslimah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the program, Safiyya.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me, Qureisha.
No, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I think it's an opportunity for us as we managed to get you away from your twins for a little while. Safiyya, your twins are now just a little over a year,
yes.
And you have stated that becoming a mother offers the realization that there are many ways to exist. So how have you managed your academic life together with the new Islamic pursuits that you have embarked on, as well as motherhood?
Well, I must say, Qureisha, motherhood was a huge shock because I was a very independent person before becoming a mother. I was involved in so many different activities. And then suddenly you're placed with this responsibility of, two newborn babies. So it was quite a juggling act. And for me, most of it was centered around time management and also just, taking up everyone's offers of, babysitting and their help and support. But I was also very fortunate enough to have a very involved husband. And so together, we've managed to navigate each other's schedules and...
And you continued studying and doing your lectures?
Yes, I did. I took, obviously, I think it was almost a 4 to 5 month break where I wasn't really doing anything except some online work and things. And then, I got back into...
Okay, but now, just staying on the topic of the two beautiful girls that you have, they have fascinating names as well. So I would like you to briefly elaborate and mention to the viewers what are their names, because it's the first time that I encountered their names. And I did some research from your blog on the postings that you put about the girls and the beautiful names. But if you can just explain to us.
Well, one of the very deep spiritual works that I study with my teacher is the works of Imam Ghazali. And it was from his works that I came across, both of these, you could say, concepts. The one is Kimia, which is one of the twins' names. And Kimia means alchemy or transformation. And it's linked in the Islamic sciences to transforming one's soul from a very dull state into one that's, very spiritually aware. And alchemy, literally is transforming base metals into gold.
So giving it value.
Giving things value and, bringing about, a state of heightened awareness. My other twin daughter, Ithar, her name means altruism or selflessness. And again, I came across this concept in the works of Imam Ghazali, where he speaks about this concept of preferring others over yourself. And it's actually a term that comes from the Quran itself, where Allah speaks about the Ansar, who He says, وَيَأْثُرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. They preferred others over themselves, and for this they were successful, or they attained success. And we speak obviously of, not success in this world, but otherworldly success. And so both of these names just resonated with what I feel, Muslims need to be creating in today's world. They need to be transforming society, but they also need to show selflessness in doing so. And I hope that, they could live up to these names.
I'm sure they will, inshallah, with a dynamic mom and dad like the two of you. They definitely would. Coming now to very much of what you have spent the last couple of years doing is that you monitor the internet quite feverishly, and you respond to inconsistencies and untruths about Muslim women, almost as a form of vanguard, guarding the truth, especially seeing that Islam is so much in the media. But this can be very challenging. So if you can tell us what has been the most common misperceptions or misconceptions that you have found on the internet, especially related to Muslim women.
Okay, well, I must say, Qureisha, I am a woman of the 21st century, so the internet is really one of the, first frontiers, which I feel, so much work can be done in terms of both, shaping the way that Islam is understood, and especially the way that Muslim women are understood or express themselves. But you're right, it is very challenging because the internet is open and free to all, and anyone, can post or write or publish, whatsoever they wish. And so my work then is centered on two fronts. The first is countering stereotypes of Muslim women from within the Muslim community itself.
So we work inside out.
Yes, so that's, working on issues like, women and the mosque, or women's rights to education, and etc. And then the other frontier is working, on the rest of the world's perceptions of Muslim women. So that's, the very stereotypical ideas that Muslim women are oppressed, that we're forced to wear hijab, we, arranged into marriages without consent, things like honor killings and female genital mutilation. Those are all perceptions that have come to be seen as Islamic. And so some of the work we do is to critique all of these notions, because there's various articles published, even on very reputable websites. Yeah. And so our work at Muslima Media Watch is then to counter this.
Okay, so the most common misperceptions are these about the hijab, or about stagnation of Muslim women, oppression of Muslim women, things like
freedom,
that. Yeah.
Autonomy,
things like that. Yeah, so the usual stuff that we have been hearing.
And we don't say that these issues don't exist in the Muslim world, because they do, but we try to balance it with an understanding of, what Islam is, what role culture plays, what role global politics play. These all come into.
Okay, now if you can quickly tell me, do you feel that women have been marginalized from learning and from teaching Islam? Because, basically Muslim women, the only avenue that has been open to them has been limited to that of the role of the Apa. And do you think this needs to change?
I guess I would begin by saying that, we need to be grateful for the role that Apas have played in the nurturing of our young children, and they're one of the first people that, kids come into contact with when learning about Islam. But yes, we need to move beyond that now, because, we live in a world where there's so much going on. There's such an important need for women to educate themselves. And yes, we have been marginalized from accessing that same level of education that males have been given.
So I'm going to have to stop you here. We're going to come back, if you can hold that thought for me. After the break, we will continue on the role of Muslim women and their ability to take forth especially their role in the religion, moving beyond the concept of the Apa. welcome back. Before we went on the break, Safiyya was explaining to us about the fact that women have been marginalized. And Safiyya, I'd like you to, if possible, to continue with that thought that you... I'm so sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. As I was saying, women have been marginalized, specifically in accessing the same level of education that males have, always been given. And the reason this is so important is that if women are to assume positions of leadership, they need to be equipped, with the same level of knowledge. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that in South Africa at the moment, but there are a number of international initiatives, for example, the Zaytuna Institute in the United States, which are giving, both males and females the chance to become accomplished scholars, in the Islamic sciences, together, co-education, the same, access to the teacher, the same access to the work, the same coming out with the same qualification, where they would both be able to teach, an audience of, men and women. There would be no difference in their, ability or competency.
Oh, I think well, we'll come to that a little later. We'll understand now why South Africa is still falling behind in that. But I want to ask you, have Muslim women occupied public spaces? And again, this would relate to what you just said now, where women came out with the same qualifications and able to teach men and women. So have they occupied public spaces, or is this a modern Jahil and Orientalist phenomenon, as has often been pronounced by many of our local scholars, or ulama, if I may call?
It's very ironic that those labels would actually be ascribed to such women, because this is one of my pet subjects. And if we go back into history, starting from the earliest times, for example, the time in which the Prophet ﷺ lived, and moving on further down the centuries, we find women in almost every public position that one could imagine. I mean, we are also familiar with the stories of his wives. But, do we really know to what extent they were public personalities? Aisha radiallahu anha, for example, was a scholar of note, but besides being a scholar, she consulted, with the people after the Prophet had passed on. Salama was known to have, very good political acumen and advised the Prophet, for example, at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. There were other women like Nusayba who were present at very secret meetings, for example, the Treaty of Aqaba. She was one of the women who were present there. There was another woman that was a companion of the Prophet, Shafa bint Abdullah. And she was a literate woman, and this was in a time where most people were illiterate. And she was actually very competent in the skills of medicine. She taught medicine then to the Prophet's wife, Hafsa radiallahu anha. And after the Prophet's demise, Umar radiallahu anhu had actually appointed Shafa as a public administrator. So here were women assuming positions of leadership in public, very much in public. And this related to both, religious leadership as well as, just general administrative
community
leadership.
Work or whatever.
And then, you go down the centuries and you find women who were leaders like Nafisa at-Tahira, who was a saint and a scholar, and she was known to have consulted with Imam Shafi'i, for example, on many legal matters, and he actually would take advice from her. We have another scholar, Fatima Yashrutia, who was a Lebanese saint, and she was known to have taught in the mosque, for example, in the very masjid, to both men and women. And then, I can really go on about this subject because I'm very passionate about it. We find in the narrations of hadith, for example, over 7,000 women transmitters of hadith. And it is written that no woman had ever falsified hadith. So just the very act of receiving and then narrating hadith is also a very a public and a very position that puts one, in a sense, makes one a leader.
So basically, women have always occupied public spaces.
Most certainly.
Yeah, but then what has happened? Because Omid Safi, who is a professor of Islamic studies at the University of North Carolina, and of course he is an award-winning teacher and speaker, and has recently written the article, "What Would Muhammad Do, Men and Women as Equal in the Houses of God." He speaks of the positive change in Turkey's mosques, and that Turkey recognizes the importance of mosques as developing a woman's spirituality. So now in this 21st century, we have a change where men having to come out writing articles and say, yes, women should be in the public spaces, that they should, accommodation should be made for them, that the mosque should be the center of learning. Why has that now suddenly come up, and why do we not see it in South Africa?
Why has it come up? We've seen that there's been a move, I suppose, from the very beginning to establish culture rather than religion in many ways. And you know, some cultures are by default patriarchal, and so you know these things get implemented, and as they come down from generation to generation, there's no kind of establishing whether you know these things are religion or they're just things from our tradition. And they become so deeply entrenched that it becomes difficult then to disengage ourselves from them.
So then, do you think that there is a contradiction in the way Islam is taught and practiced with regards to women?
Yes, because if we look at our text, for example, you know, there are, you know, so much of openings and so much of rights and so much of, you know, functionalities that women
Can
serve
adopt,
and they can, you know, ascribe to. But these are all in our text, and not everybody has access to the text. And so in the way it's practiced, you know, we are taught a very limited, you know, version of these texts.
So when we come back from the break, we will take this a little bit further and, of course, discuss the concept of Muslim women. Are they brainwashed or are they simply apathetic? Do we really want to know what our religion informs or tells us, guides us, and the opportunities it gives us? Or are we content to just sit back and take whatever has been spoon-fed to us? After the break, we will raise these issues. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the final segment of Finding Me with my very special guest Safiyya Surtee. And we will now raise the issues that I think many women would be interested in, and of course others would find very controversial. But the idea is to raise the issues, to talk about them, and to try and find solutions. And I think that is one of the reasons why you also so diligently monitor the net to try and correct and debate issues so that the true solution can be found and better information could be put out there. But one of the major challenges that I think we find today is that there are very many verbal messages that often get confused in the manner in which they are then interpreted, because a woman get verbal messages and then there's a different interpretation to that verbal message. And so for women searching for the true Islam, this can be disconcerting. And I specifically want to raise that in conjunction with the article that you wrote, In the Name of Honor, which was at the time of the Free Afia Siddiqui campaign in South Africa. If you can perhaps just illuminate to us what were some of the contradictions that you picked up, and just to make it very clear to the viewers, no one is focusing on the fact that Sister Afia is, you know, has been incorrectly incarcerated or things like that. We are looking at the images within the entire campaign, and then of course the mixed messages that came out with specific reference to.
Okay, well, I guess I should begin by explaining that the reason I picked up on this story was, you know, it was so replete in our media at the time, you know, when Sister Afia's sister, for example, was invited to South Africa. And I did find it very positive that, you know, they'd invited a woman to come to South Africa to speak about an issue which, you know, affected another Muslim woman who happened to be her sister. And there was a lot of hype around this. And then I started looking deeper into the story, and I found that there were some inconsistencies in the way that it was being projected. Because if we read Sister Afia's story, we know that she was a very accomplished and very educated woman. She had pursued studies at a tertiary you know, institution in the United States to the level of PhD, which meant that she spent, you know, perhaps a decade even, you know, going to university. And then she was also, you know, a career woman. She worked. She had traveled on her own. She even lived in the States, for example, you know, on her own for a while. And so I found this a very positive image of an independent Muslim woman. You know, she adopted hijab, for example, and she gave off a very strong and willful impression of what a Muslim woman can be. But you find that then the media was projecting this story of Sister Afia as, for example, an imprisoned rose, someone who's very helpless and meek and not able to really, you know, fend for herself. And yes, I mean, she is in prison, and I'm sure that, you know, the conditions that she's suffering under are terrible. But we need to understand the contradiction between her as this, you know, Western educated, dynamic woman, and then the story that's projected in the media where we see her, you know, as someone who we need to feel sorry or sympathize with. You know, and this notion of honor, of how Muslim men need to step up, you know, to protect the honor of their women, as if women almost cannot, you know, speak for themselves. And also the other contradictions in actually inviting female speakers, and having them speak to mixed audiences, which is very positive, but
yes.
again contradicts the
messages that have come out.
Yes. Sent out. So how do women kind of receive all of this? Are we supposed to follow in the footsteps of Sister Afia, for example, and become these very dynamic and educated women, or are we supposed to, just support her cause but not actually take up that higher calling?
And of course, the contradiction was, which I myself have encountered, is when many women have said that, we've often heard the ulema say women mustn't travel alone, that they mustn't speak to men, they mustn't be in mixed audience. But then we found all of this again in the Afia campaign. And so, yes, you sit with a dilemma. Is it okay for this and not okay for that? How do you reconcile it? Shouldn't it be accepted that Muslim women are in the public space, that they are educated, that they have a right to voice themselves, that they have a right to participate in politics or whatever it is? And I suppose if you understood this, if you understood that the women have a role to play, there shouldn't ordinarily be a contradiction and these mixed messages coming out.
Yes, I agree completely, and I think this is where issues like the internet, for example, comes in, where women are able to network with other women in similar situations, and they're able to learn and say, hey, this is happening in other countries. Women have access to this, this and that. They have access to the media. They have access to the mosques. They have access to learning institutions. And so this is where activism comes in, where women say, we're receiving these mixed messages.
Yeah, and I think what is very important also is that if you look at you picked up also recently, or it was last year somewhere, which the contradictions that came out in an Islamic radio broadcast. So it was about retribution, something about retribution lane or something like that.
Yes, they were basically portraying the stereotype that all Muslim women who go to the mosque or to the masajid are looking for trouble, and they're there to get up to mischief. And this sends out a very negative message for Muslim women. They immediately assume that we don't want to be one of those women who cause fitna or temptation, so we won't go to the mosque. Whereas there are so many women who frequent the mosque just in order to further that relationship they have.
And then, of course, if you look at that message, it was sent out on a local radio station in South Africa, and the opposite, which is what is happening in Turkey, to cater for Muslim women to go to, it's a totally different message. On the one hand, here they're saying women mustn't go to the mosque, or those who go are bad. And on the other hand, we have in Turkey where they're saying, yes, women must come, it is their space, they must learn, and we must make it as comfortable as possible for them.
Yes, the director of that program actually stated that when women enter a mosque and a masjid, which is a house of God, they should feel like they are in a house of God, that they should not feel marginalized, because we often say that men and women are equal in the eyes of Allah. So we need to actually step up to this declaration that we so easily make.
Yes, I think that was one of the first things that I wrote in my book, Proudly Muslim, that on Women's Day, there's this elaborate pronunciations about Muslim women and what Muslim women have achieved. But if you look at in practice, what Muslim women are then told later on, so it's the total opposite of what the women of the past have accomplished, and Muslim women then become apathetic. Do you feel that Muslim women are apathetic, that they're becoming very laid back, that they don't mind being brainwashed, that they don't want to question, yet there is an abundance of information available?
Well, I must say here, it's not a question of age. So you find younger and older women who are either apathetic or who are either, very enthusiastic and active in seeking knowledge. I think it comes down to a few issues. One of them being, the way that they were kind of socialized as young people, and what they were taught religion was about. So it's very easy to be dictated to. It's very difficult to go out and seek the information yourself. And so sometimes it's just an issue of not having that energy or willpower to go out and seek it. And another issue is the males in these women's lives. What are their attitude? If a woman decides that she's going to go out and research a different opinion, what will be the societal pressure on her? Is she going to be labeled, and can she handle that?
Okay, as a parting advice, what would you like to leave the audience with? What would you like to tell them?
I'd like to tell them to look back into our legacy. Our history is very, very rich with examples of women who have assumed positions of leadership in every sphere. I'd like women to research that and to realize what they can aspire to be. And your program is Finding Me, and in order to find yourself, we need to look at our history.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Safiyya. And at this point in time, where there is so much attention around Muslim women and where many of them are contributing so much, perhaps it is time that we look at what these women have to say, what they do, what they achieve, instead of only focusing on what they're wearing, what is their dress. You know, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said in the hadith of Tirmizi, none honors woman except he who is honorable, and none despises them except he who is despicable. Thank you, Jazakallah khair, Safiyya, for being with us today. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all the viewers.
La ilaha illallah Muhammad